look forward to. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you to Jakob and Nicolas also for inviting me and giving me a chance to share my research. It's really nice. And I hope to learn also more about the kind of projects and research that goes on at the institute and what else and the stuff that you're working on over the next. It's only 1.5 months, but hopefully there will be other opportunities to learn what you're working on. So as Jakob said, I'm a PhD fellow. My name is Joen. I'm a PhD fellow at Kunstakademiet in Trondheim in Norway under this big technical university called NTNU. The Art Academy is just like a very small institution under this really big technical institution, which is an interesting place to be. So I'm now on my third year, plus minus, out of 4 years. So I'm about to enter the phase where I have to wrap it up and to conclude, and something I will come back to. And right now I'm a guest here, and living in Samsø with my partner and my little child, 6-month-old boy who might come at some point today. So it's also, to be completely honest, it's not officially parental leave, but it's also, as you know, the ones who have kids, it takes a lot of time with such small ones. So, but we are managing. So today I would like to share some insights into my practice-based research project titled, as Jakob said, In Search of Now Time, Live Editing as a Mode of Research, and address my motivation and background for embarking on this, as well as to situate the project theoretically, historically, and not least methodologically. Also, along the way, I will touch upon some of the ethical and political aspects of doing this kind of work, and share some of the challenges that I'm facing, especially when it comes to the formal requirements of the final result. I don't know how it is here, but in Norway, the practice-based PhDs are still fairly new, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm basically the first generation in my academy, so there's a lot of trial and errors, and kind of inventing the forms and the regulations as we go, for good and bad. I mean, that was one of the things that attracted me there, that I could take part in kind of formulating what I believe artistic research is and or should be. But it's also, we end up spending a lot of time basically discussing formalities or lack of formalities and so on. So it comes with good and bad things. But anyway, I would be curious to hear your thoughts, and that's also why I'm very intrigued about being here, actually, to be outside of the Art Academy and to be in a more proper academic setting, perhaps. So I'm not afraid of that. It's a deliberate choice, but also knowing that there might be some different ways of going about research and somehow the practicalities and formalities around a PhD. Not only from Denmark to Norway, but also from strictly academic to what I'm doing, which is, I would say, still on the border, on the fringes of academia in some sort of sense. But anyway, I would be curious to hear your thoughts on what I bring up, and in particular to discuss any theoretical weaknesses in the project. I believe that I still have quite some way before I can submit. Some of the keywords and concepts for this project are notions of the event and its aftermath, representation, mediation, orientation, montage, liveness, contemporaneity, Benjaminian now time, and the suspension of historical time. So please feel free to add your thoughts on these and other related issues after my presentation. Thank you. Or even in the next months. I should also mention that I plan to stop my presentation once in a while to show some excerpts of my artistic work that is related to this research, namely a series of live TV programs that I did for Documenta 15 last summer. As part of my contribution to the exhibition, I chose to bring the described live editing methodology to Kassel after realizing that the local TV station Offener Kanal's studio were located right above our collective's venue in the Kulturbahnhof. I don't know if you all went to Documenta, or I don't know if you saw this venue, but it's Kulturbahnhof is kind of one of the oldest remaining venues of Documenta, and we were basically the only collective that were given that as a space to exhibit in, and had kind of free hands to use the infrastructure of that space. And as I said, I found out that there was a local TV station, one of the last remaining public access, state-supported public access television stations that are left in Germany, was based in that Kulturbahnhof. So coming with a background in video and also having done some TV and experimented in general with the TV format, I thought it was obvious that I should engage with this TV station. Also knowing that the curatorial strategy proposed by Joen Vedel, emphasizing forms of production and process-based practices, would most likely lead to a more complex and heterogeneous chorus of utterances than usual, to say the least. I decided to treat the 100 days of the exhibition as a form of revolt, a conflictual and contradictory space pointing to a multiplicity of temporalities and struggles seemingly not reconcilable. An exhibition, I believe, truly out of its time, or perhaps ahead of its time, surely in the German context, in that it so clearly departed from the tragical events of the 20th century Documenta was born into, which, as it turned out, Germany and Europe were not ready to let go of. In this way, I believe Documenta 15 became an exhibition in and against the present. So that's coming back to the title of the talk, of the presentation. Yeah, and I'm open to discuss Documenta afterwards. I won't say much more about it, but I have another paragraph here. But so from the opening day of Documenta to the very last day of the exhibition, I made 5 one-hour live-edited TV programs on Offener Kanal's public access channel. These were broadcasted live and accessible to all Kassel households via cable TV and streamed online. So it was important for me that this was, you didn't have to buy the Documenta ticket. You could actually, didn't even have to leave your house. You could just sit on your couch and watch my contribution. So there was, I was thinking a lot of my work deals with kind of other forms of distribution than the regular kind of gallery spaces and exhibition spaces. So I thought it was interesting to have this, my contribution to be aired in the TV format through cable TV basically. So each program consisted of materials shot on the days leading up to the broadcast, mixed with live cameras in the TV studio, where local street musicians were invited to perform, as well as archival material from the official Documenta archive going back to the first edition in 1955. In addition to this, I was collaborating with teenagers, so I spent basically half a year in the Documenta archive, going through watching hundreds and hundreds of hours of existing video material. As you can imagine, in 55 there were perhaps altogether 10 minutes, I think, on different Super 8 tapes lying around in the basement, but every 5 years it would grow exponentially as the video production apparatus became more, so it was a crazy amount of material, and I together with my partner and an assistant, we saw it all, and then handpicked from that archive what we thought would be what we were interested in bringing into today's program. So we had like different focuses in that archive, different kind of cuts into the archive. One were very much based around audience members, like basically analyzing the exhibition through looking at the audience members, how they were interacting with the art. How they were dressed, and you can read a lot from these things, like so from the very stiff 50s where everyone was like hat and ties and whatever, like to the 60s and 70s where people were smoking pot in front of Frederiksberg and playing flutes and so on. So it was like really, and of course it's also a way it was also a fascinating way to read world history because every 5 years Documenta had to somehow orientate itself in the world and speak to some of those events, and it was fascinating to see how little or how those events were present in the archive. So for example, Documenta 68 was 68 was not really barely mentioned. And I would say for this exhibition, for some reason, the war in Ukraine was barely mentioned. So there are these kind of events that perhaps because of the temporality of the production of the exhibition doesn't enter into the discourse. So it's really not as flexible as I kind of in my naivety had maybe thought it would have been. But at least with my contribution, I tried to be very open and flexible to. But I will come back to that. So in addition to this, I was collaborating with in addition to the archival material, I was collaborating with teenagers and activists from the local anti-racist network called Street Bolzer, who were sending me live stream videos from Documenta venues across the city. So they used Twitch and TikTok and YouTube and Vimeo, and they were all sending me these feeds into the TV studio that I could then incorporate into the live program. Treating Documenta 15 as a form of revolt became more and more pertinent from program to program as the racist attacks and anti-Semitic accusations took off and increasingly came from all directions. As hoped for, the method of live TV production allowed the possibility of being in time with the exhibition, as I was able to include written statements in response to the accusations and in solidarity with the artists and collectives accused. And as such, the live TV medium became a platform and a meeting place between different forms of historical layers seemingly disconnected by linear time. Or to say it in another way, one long non-linear program about a very non-linear event. Perhaps now it's a good time to just show you 5 minutes from the very first program. So the first program is about the opening. It was aired on the official opening day of Documenta 15. And the archive material that we work with is also from all those 14 other editions of Documenta openings historically. So now we are 12 minutes into the. Oh ja, tak.
Die Documenta hat eine bunte Gesellschaft nach Kassel geführt, die sich Klarheit verschaffen will. Man war auf der Biennale in Venedig und hat dort Hinweise erhalten, die man in Kassel bestätigt oder widerlegt haben möchte. Wer hat Chancen, zu den Arrivierten aufzurücken und wer hat die Gunst schon verloren? Auf einer Gartenparty beim Vorsitzenden des Documenta-Rates informierten sich Kritiker bei den Museumsdirektoren, Händler bei den Künstlern, Kunstbeamte bei den Kunsthistorikern über Kurs- und Marktwert der Künstler, so wenig auch die Documenta nach dem Willen ihrer Schöpfer eine Verkaufsmesse sein soll. Indessen, auf der Documenta vertreten zu sein, ist durchaus ein Faktor, der sich auswirkt. Die großen Galerien Europas notieren die Anwesenheit der Künstler und das Gütezeichen Documenta begleitet die Kunstwerke bis zu ihrem Verkauf. Verständlich also, dass die Entscheidung darüber, welche Künstler ihre Arbeiten nach Kassel schicken durften, zum Teil heftig umstritten war.
Wir haben eben die Forellenmus mit dem Lachsklavier vorbereitet, dann haben wir noch Gemüsesticks mit verschiedenen Dips und Kohlroulade im Einmachglas, also diverse Kostbarkeiten.
Schon jetzt ist Documenta 12 von OGM-Bürger legendär. Als unendliche Geschichte von Pleiten, Pech und Pannen.
Diese Ausstellung soll durch Aufzeigen des Weges der Kunst in unsere Zeit und in unserer Zeit, knapp 50 Kilometer vom Rand der freien Welt, doch vor allem eines aufweisen: dass Freiheit unteilbar ist und identisch mit der Freiheit der Kunst, der Freiheit des schöpferischen Menschen in der Wahl seiner Themen und seiner Ausdrucksmittel.
Sponsoren und Öffentlichkeit ja, aber weniger auffällig als unter ihrem publikumswirksamen Vorgänger Jan Huth vor 2 Jahren. Er konnte seinen 19 Millionen Mark Etat durch Sponsoren auf 21 Millionen Mark aufstocken. Eine Arbeit, die die neue künstlerische Leiterin der Documenta 10 lieber ihrem Geschäftsführer überlassen wird.
The vertical images is the TV studio itself. I don't know if that is clear, but you see a person going from downstairs where there's an audience looking at this live stream, and then up stairs to. So you get a sense of how this unfolds. Yeah. So thank you. Before I get back or into this description of my work, I would like to start out by setting the scene for the research, the context, or rather share a few words about my background, why I set out to search for now time, and how I came to develop this method of live editing as a mode of research. It's a rather long journey, so please bear with me. I studied at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, and Whitney program, as Jakob says, parallel to an activist education on the streets, so to speak, within the autonomist/communist/anarchist movement in Copenhagen and elsewhere. I've been involved with organizing around anti-fascism, feminism, refugee solidarity, and self-organized spaces like the Youth House and Folkets Hus in Nørrebro. So I always had one foot within the art scene and its institutions, and another one out on the streets, being actively engaged with some kind of struggle. When I was younger, I was very reluctant to mix my activist work with my artwork, seeing how certain artists took ownership of historical and contemporary struggles, and ultimately recuperating collective manifestations and efforts into individual careers and exhibition making, far removed from the people taking part in those struggles. Although I'm still highly skeptical of a lot of the ways politics and the political gets represented within the contemporary arts, I have softened up a bit over the years and now try to treat my artistic work more as an extension of my political work, and the other way around, my art practice as an extension of my everyday life. This is not easy in any way, but nonetheless a productive ambiguity to work with, I believe. Why abandon the political potentialities that art can offer? In either way, it is crucial for me that what I do is anchored in an ethical and political commitment, which takes the knowledge art produces seriously as a place for contestation, as a question of form and gesture, and a matter of conscious positioning within a society's political reality. Through video works, performances, exhibition making, writing, teaching, publishing text, and organizing in a broad sense, my practice has thus manifested itself in many different contexts and forms, from shows in museums and galleries to screenings in film festivals and events in self-organized spaces and online platforms. Another important aspect of my work is the various forms of collaborations that I partake in. I don't have enough time to go into all the groups, temporary institutions, and loose networks that I have been a part of or still am a part of. I just want to say that collective practices are integral to the way I think and work. In fact, I've always used my art practice as a way to orientate myself in the world with others, while experimenting with ways to make complex structural formations more accessible through an aesthetic form. So I think this notion of orientation is kind of an important key in a lot of my PhD work, but also in general orientation in a world that is seemingly sped up in terms of the temporality, and also orientation on a personal level in my own life. And I think that's also what Jakob was saying in the bio, that my work deals with small and political events, so I kind of don't distinguish. For me, that's all politics, like the very small events in my life, like when my father dies, or when I fall in love and so on, or having a child, and then the bigger events when yeah, you name it, when the youth house gets dismantled or whatever. So that's what I'm coming to now. Overall, I would say that there are two political events that has informed my artistic practice and somehow also laid the ground for this research project. Number one is the youth house struggle in 2007, and number two is the financial crisis of 2008, or the so-called debt crisis, which soon after resulted in a multiplicity of struggles and attacks from the capitalist classes and the new right that quickly led to a global wave of protests in the form of revolts still ongoing until this day. So I say that it has informed my artistic practice, but perhaps it has also formed me as an artist. It's definitely, I feel that I come from a generation of crisis. I mean, I was finished at the Art Academy at the same time as the financial crisis happened, and that kind of took over everything we set up. I mean, I spent 2 years in the Art Academy just reading Das Kapital and not talking about art, for example. I mean, we were a group of students who were extremely interested in trying to understand what this crisis was about, and not super interested in art, to be honest. But yeah, there was the School of Walls and Space, which is kind of a school at the Art Academy in Copenhagen that is known for social commitment and so on, where a lot of work is done very collectively, and we kind of ran the department ourselves. The professor was very much in the background and so on. So if I were to date when this research project began, I would say it was on the 6th of December 2008, when a 15-year-old boy named Alexandros Grigoulopoulos was shot dead by a cop in the neighborhood of Exarchia in Athens, which soon after led to a massive revolt that spread to the rest of Greece and lasted for more than a month. I was not part of these events, which later got to be known as the December Revolt, but I followed daily videos and reports from the riots on Athens in the media and other counter-information sites. From my flat in Nørrebro, I found a picture online of a front banner from a demonstration that read, "We are an image of the future." I printed this image out and pinned it to my wall. And surely enough, soon after, the revolts flared up in all corners of the world. Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, Spain, France, Brazil, Hong Kong, Sudan, Turkey, Chile, the US, Argentina, UK, Lebanon, Haiti, and the list goes on and on, quite literally as I speak. Now, suddenly everywhere I looked online, I could find similar imagery. Images of masses of people demonstrating, of burning banks, barricades and banners, of looted stores and slogans on walls, of Molotov cocktails, water cannons and endless police violence. According to the Carnegie Institute, roughly 2/3 of all countries in the world have experienced at least one major anti-government protest since 2010. That's for me an absurd number. And I don't know if you remember how time was before 2000. Today is the norm when we turn on the television or whatever, like social media. We're used to this kind of imagery. It's part of our everyday life, but in 2010, before 2007, it was not. It was far between, at least in the western part of the world, and what were communicated here was very far between these kind of outbursts, I would argue. So something happened, and that's what I'm coming back to. I would argue that I would argue that it is only doing revolts that one can ever learn anything new. This is a little bit polemical in this setting, but yeah. So I believe it's only doing revolts that one can ever learn anything new. So after having followed many of these revolts online, I now started traveling to them and take part in them, conducting what one could call militant research, a form of research constructed out of lived experiences, while taking into account my own position in terms of the privileges I carry with me and the possibilities and limitations of perception when a complete picture cannot be produced. Together with comrades over the years, I've been mapping the constellations of these different revolts and attempting to try and understand what they were about, their shifting affinities and their countless correspondences, to take them serious as gestures and events, to think with and through them, as well as their implications for how we conceptualize and represent the political. But above all, I've been interested in investigating the intrinsic relationship between revolts and time. Following Donatella di Cesara, I would argue that there are no linear direction in revolts, and rarely any clear beginning nor end. The revolt is not a negligible phenomenon as such, and therefore calls for an altogether different way of inhabiting time. Following another important thinker for my project, the much neglected Italian theorist Furio Jessi, one could even say that the revolt has the capacity to break with temporal linearity and ultimately to suspend historical time. In his book on the Spartacist uprising in 1919, Jessi gives one of the best descriptions, I think, of this suspension of historical time. Quote, "You can love a city, you can recognize its houses and its streets, even in your remotest or dearest memories. But only in the hour of revolt is the city really felt as your own city. Your own because it belongs to the I, but at the same time to the others. Your own because it is a battlefield that you have chosen and the collectivity too has chosen. Your own because it is a circumscribed space in which historical time is suspended and in which every act is valuable in and of itself. In the hour of revolt, one is no longer alone in the city." End quote. So I'll show you now program 2 from Documenta. another speed and flow than you're ever used to see on TV. You got a glimpse of the apparatus, so to say, me that are sitting there deciding what image should go on, and followed by the next, and it's a rather stressful situation to be in, knowing that there's like people watching in the other end, and there's only one. You can only do one choice. You cannot really undo what you. It's not like editing, normal editing. I will come back to that. Now, as my artistic practice is mostly centered around moving image production, I have been struggling to come up with an adequate form to represent my research and the revolts I was engaging with, especially since these revolts were all about defying the very unrepresentativeness of political institutions and thus defying representation altogether. From the beginning on, it was clear to me that I did not want to follow any classical documentary approach with a linear production chain such as filming, editing, and screening. It simply felt wrong to go back to my safe editing suite and from there build a narrative about the tumultuous events I had been a part of and whose outcomes were still very much unsettled. I began questioning how to reflect these indeterminate, at times illegible and unforeseeable collective actions that the revolts are, without, on the one hand, surrendering the captured image to actuality and contingency, or, on the other hand, fixating the movement I intended to follow by cleaning up the noise, flattening the complexities, and smoothing the conflicts. How could I avoid falling into representation and so into revelation, recognition, and ultimately ideology? How could I keep the revolt alive in filmic, temporal form, or at least not foreclose their outcome and potential for change? As part of my research and study of these revolts, I have been filming and building an extensive video archive over the last 15 years, consisting of a broad range of materials related to these events, while I've been experimenting with different ways to activate this living archive. Through exhibitions, performances, workshops, books, and essays, I've been presenting fragments of this archive as work in progress, while developing and refining various live formats with the aim of collapsing the temporalities of production and presentation in order to connect the documentation of the events with the event of their presentation. Most important among the artistic formats in my research is the live editing of videos. By the use of live editing equipment normally used in television production and the mediation of big events, or should I say the production of media events, I have developed a performative methodology in which I can make new video works live and improvisational in front of the audience. Far from being perfect and without its own limits and contradictions, this form of live activation has allowed the possibility of being in time while interrogating the very conditions of temporality, of bringing together in the same room or on the same channel multiple temporalities, histories, aesthetics, voices, geographies, and layers of reflection. Inspired by Julio Garcia Espinosa's manifesto for an imperfect cinema from 1969, in which he calls for a political cinema that embraces available mediums and less polished forms, I have been wanting to show how time can be experienced in prolonged moments of revolt and how historical shifts can be given a form. This became first and foremost an exercise in capturing the energies and temporalities of the events, highlighting the importance of attending to minor registers of time. As we know, there's a huge gap between one's understanding of living through events, so-called live time, and this other more sanitized, linear, empty time, to use a description by Walter Benjamin. As a participant, I know how living through a revolt can at times feel like a complex process of political, psychological, and temporal transformation, so full of contradictions. Resistance is folded into everyday life, fermenting the ordinary. What seems spectacular from the outside can also feel extremely boring, repetitive, and exhausting on the inside. This is an experience I have attempted to capture visually through the live editing of moving images. in the hope of giving space to the not yet happening and the not moving forward while not standing still, to the lingering rather than the full stop. As such, I have often been shooting in moments of waiting while searching for the next gesture, and so a lot of my materials capture this constant role of anticipation, never knowing exactly when I was at the center of the event and if such a thing existed at all. And what happened was that slowly the events started thickening. In fact, when the international press had left from these revolts, I would always stay and document what happened the day after the revolt or the month after. And sometimes I would also arrive too late, meaning after the event had taken place, which brought me to think more and more about the aftermath of these struggles, that peculiar time when normalcy is trying to return, but something, let's call it a revolutionary force, is preventing that from happening and instead stretches time into other forms, thus creating new ways of living in time. With these experiences, I started questioning what it means to be late, and too late for what? What constitutes a political event? How does it start, and when does it end? I'll show you the third program, or a few minutes. And if you have any questions along the way, you also, if there's something that's unclear, or yeah. This is the third program. Each program is an hour. So I'm only showing you, like, and this is like from 8 minutes in, kind of random place, but it gives you a sense of. lot of emphasis on music here in these clips that I showed, but it's not always the case through the whole program. But as you see, there's some recurrent motifs: the clock and the trains leaving and coming, and of course references to Marx and to Benjamin with the idea of progress. And of course, I mean, the whole train station itself become like a stage in a way, where we would film from outside the TV studio, inside the TV studio, but also down on the platforms themselves. So, yeah. So similarly to the destituent characteristics of the ongoing revolts, fueled by a desire to tear down and dismantle prevailing political representations and institutions, the live editing method I have been developing also hinges on the desire to undo certain aspects of how we normally work with and present moving images. By attempting a kind of honesty and transparency in the production and presentation, a vulnerability and a precarity in articulating this particular experience of time during a revolt, my use or misuse of the live editing equipment seeks a radical openness to the event and its context. I don't know if you're familiar with the whole destitution kind of wing of political activist kind of discourse these days, but destitution basically means to get rid of what is there, to not recognize power through the institutions as we normally know them, but basically to seek to get rid of power, to search for power elsewhere. I mean, that's kind of it's more complicated than that. But I think the notion of destitution and perhaps a destituent film practice is something that I can develop further. So a destituent film practice, perhaps, at least one that is occupied with how things are done and the possibilities to undo them. A practice which is closer to thought, life, relations and events. A practice that looks at itself and oftentimes disagree with one does or makes. A practice that struggles to find out what it should align itself with: cinema, video art, journalism, TV. Surely a broadcast, an event, moving images, film, cut, montage, assemblages, associations, ruptures and all of that. But also a practice that does not separate the time of its making from the time of its viewing. A practice that is highly suspicious of all seeming simultaneity and smooth flows of continuity. A practice that is set out to unsettle the order that the ordinary media events so desperately tries to restore. A form of live editing that rubs the technology against the grain, if you like. For me, this is not about representing discontent in the hope that this will spark anger in the viewer, nor is it about revealing injustice and collecting proofs with the aim of holding certain powers accountable. My motivation lies rather in the possibilities of following certain movements in movement and histories in the making or unmaking, of attempting to articulate a form that integrates solidarity and a more embodied gaze, moving images as an event beyond documentation. By turning the attention back to montage, to the cutting and assembling of imagery, I want to point to the ongoing potential histories opened up by the simple means of juxtaposition, decomposition, and superimposition of moving image material. Furthermore, I want to re-articulate the images and transform them back into gestures, thus making the apparatuses of seeing and mediating time visible and allowing it to be shown as such. Following Giorgio Agamben, one could say that this approach is neither a means with view to an end, nor an end without means, rather it is means as such, thus moving my live-edited videos from the realm of aesthetics and representation to the realm of ethics and politics. In this way, I want to create a space for doubts and fragility, accidents, glitches, and traces of lived life, in the hope that the viewer, as well as I myself, can undergo and experience another way of inhabiting time can take place. I'll show you one more excerpt.
Colonial clock and critical chaos at Kassel. Reflections on Documenta 15. The phrase chaos at Kassel, attributed to the German Minister for Culture, Claudia Roth, emerged in the initial storm of accusations of anti-Semitism at the art event Documenta 15 that takes place every 5 years at Kassel. A world-renowned exhibition of the contemporary arts for the 15th edition, the artistic direction was entrusted to the Indonesian collective Ruanggruppe. Accusations began brewing even before the official opening. The presence of the Palestinian collective, the question of funding, was signaled out for attention in a country where a recent law basically outlaws any criticism of the State of Israel, turning support for the Palestinian cause and the peaceful boycott, disinvestment, sanctions campaign into a federal crime. Subsequently, a caricatural anti-Semitic figure of a Jewish male, reminiscent of the stereotypes circulating in Europe in the early 20th century, and most notably in Nazi Germany, was identified in the work of the Indonesian collective Taring Party. It was withdrawn and led to an apology by the group. More recently, a further accusation has arrived from the depiction of an Israeli soldier mistreating a Palestinian child in a comic strip from the 1980s in the space devoted to the archives des luttes des femmes en Algérie. This turbulence led to talk of vetting all the works for anti-Semitism under the tutelage of a scientific committee. However, like the removal of books on uncomfortable topics such as slavery from school curriculums presently occurring in parts of the United States, the desire to cleanse the archive of troubling material that disturbs the consensual narrative is ultimately about censorship. Whether one likes it or not, such politically sensitive issues open up far deeper archives, posing questions of their management, definition and control. Ultimately, we are left asking who has the right to narrate, which, put more starkly and to evoke Hannah Arendt's noted phrase, means who has the right to have rights. Art, aesthetics and racism are combined in a critical configuration that has transformed Documenta 15 into a significant political event.
So that was Eva Lacour, my friend and collaborator over many years, who is also finished a PhD working with similar topics and also live editing equipment, so I invited her to take part in this program. Sorry, I know that I'm trying to rush up now. During the revolts I have taken part in, I have constantly been debating with myself when to take up my camera and thus necessarily distancing myself from the events, and when to keep the camera in the bag. I have often thought about what it means to show images of violence and what that form of spectacular imagery actually tells about the event and how much it obscures what is going on. Surely, I could have filmed the burning cars and the charging cops, and I have some of that material as well. But in contrast to most representations of these ongoing revolts I had seen online, I became more interested in documenting the non-spectacular against the spectacle of revolts. How could I articulate moving images vernacular of lived time? How could I trace time, real time, dead time, historical time, everyday time? How could I make an image of a historical process still unfolding messily in the present? And in so doing, how not to predetermine what will be allowed to count as a political image, that is to say, an image of the present set in history. How to not simply crystallize another image to be fetishized and repeated, like that of the spectacular revolt itself, which may block from you other modes at work. And little by little, almost unconsciously, my research project started gravitating towards a historical materialist investigation into the very temporalization of certain events, where revived pasts and wished-for futures started to mingle. And as such, I became not only interested in documenting what happened during the revolt, but equally interested in all that which was prevented from happening, the unfinished, the failed, the defeated. To study the historical Benjamin and feminism has taught me also means studying what we are not seeing, that which has been left out or never entered history. And in this context, I came to understand Benjamin's concept of now time or Jetztzeit in the most literal possible sense, as a conception of time focused on the radical opportunity that every moment brings with it, meaning that every moment carries a revolutionary potential which can bring about transformation of the present, that also has the ability to transform the image of the past. Instead of allowing the representation of these events to congeal into a single perspective, the method of live editing does not let the images rest, but keeps them in motion, while trying to inhabit the very temporality of the events as they unfold. In an attempt to bring out the processual character of political and aesthetic transformation in all its complexity and indeterminacy, this research project is occupied with the experimentation of ways to orientate oneself in relation to images of the world and the world of images. A project that grapples with the fact that history is no longer something outside of representation, but something that takes shape in and through the act of mediation. As such, it is a project born out of a certain crisis of representation, and perhaps also a crisis of time on the one hand, and a hands-on engagement with this crisis on the other hand. And perhaps now it's good to have a break. I do have a concluding 2 pages, and I also have one more program to show you excerpts from. Yeah. But maybe you've been so patient, and it's already like more than an hour, so...
But we can do a 5-minute break and bring the coffee or tea inside. There should be some coffee outside.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Koldt? Det var meget to, der synes. Nå, ja, undskyld, det var jo
So, yeah, I have 2 more pages and one last excerpt, and then we'll open up for a discussion or questions or anything. So to be completely honest, I'm actually not sure whether or how to include these Documenta programs in my final PhD dissertation. It's something that I'm still debating. And this has to do with the general uncertainty with the product of the live edit, the so-called afterlife of the broadcast. And it points to some of the tensions I believe that are inherent in my project, namely the relationship between process and result, liveness and delay, proximity and distance. Ultimately, I feel an urge to complicate the place of knowledge production as something that necessarily happens at the end of my research, and argue for a multiplicity of places, gestures, references, and modes of registers, from the act of filming to the act of live editing itself and the reflections afterwards, that altogether form a constellation of a knowledge to come. As you can imagine, being fully submerged into the flow of the live editing I struggle to grasp and identify the complex web of meaning that is being produced in regards to the event that is simultaneously created and recorded. Only by returning to old live edits later can I begin to trace and orientate myself within the captured event. And this brings me to the role of writing, which I'm, as I said, also still grappling with. On the one hand, I feel an urge to situate the fleeting and disparate moments of montage in language, but on the other hand, I want to experiment with the method of live editing as an aesthetics of potentiality and treat it as a mode of writing as well. Live editing as both a tool for performative artistic experimentality and a mode of research. Live editing as the setting of the conditions for things to happen and a register at the same time. And in this sense, I'm really only interested in this form insofar that it sets a mode of thinking in motion. For the same reason, I've also been exploring the educational potentials in live editing through workshops on different occasions. And as a matter of fact, I will conduct one next week at the Art Academy here in Aarhus, and soon after as part of Jakob and Nicolas' course, which I look forward to. So within the context of the PhD, I would like to move beyond the reduction of artwork and writing to subvert what the actual outcome is, while insisting on the juxtaposed rather than the resolved, allowing the material aspects of its component parts, including both writing and moving image, to be enhanced rather than overcome. By neither illustrating the written word nor separating itself entirely from it, I want to be hospitable to chance encounters and the sudden discoveries between textual and visual materials, mainly through collaborations, conversations, and interviews with other people doing a live edited broadcast. I already started doing this in Trondheim, where I invite people into the studio and I live edit it at the same time as I have a discussion with them around what we are looking at, which is very difficult. But I still think it's something to explore and work further on. In this light, a poetic reading of live editing is indeed concerned with provisionality as the central premise with which this methodology implies a risk or a possibility that blurs any question of form, formlessness, and theoretical abstraction. More than an authoritative figure that concludes his thesis with a final artwork to be exhibited, I see my role as someone that sets up situations in which something can happen. Let's call it a programmer or an editor, or call it a programmer or an editor, but one that is engaged with the production of a continuity of discontinuity. This could, for example, be setting up an online platform for a series of live edited productions called Nowtime TV, combined with a performative session at the Rosendal Theatre in Trondheim and a series of workshops. Drawing on Laurent Ballon's description of the revolt as a state of permanent questioning, of transformation, change, undoing, redoing, unveiling, returning, and discovering, I suggest an aesthetics of potentiality, where improvisation and intuition is key, and the creative act becomes rather a matter of setting the parameters for something to take place. As far as my live editing methodology can be considered as a process-oriented, collaborative, open-ended methodology, experimentality, which I would argue is the case, my research project is less concerned with knowledge production in any fixed sense, and more with a questioning of how to engage the fields of recording and editing together, how to practice different models of image and event formation, how to keep history open. This form of knowledge production comes close to Bergson's idea of intuitive knowledge, which should be understood as something beyond an instinct or a mere going with the flow of things, but rather as a moment of insight, a flash of knowledge not too dissimilar to Benjamin's Nowtime, that operates through constellations rather than continuity, similitude rather than representation, and a detail or fractionary over the whole. Antithetical to knowledge as we know it, intuition opens up to the possibility of knowledge as it could be, and calls for a temporary suspension of the method of knowing. Intuition as a tool that can enable us to apprehend that which is in process, a form that can bring us in contact with duration. Intuitive knowledge or contact with duration, however, is not a given. It is achieved with difficulty, and even then it is fleeting and thus impossible to sustain. And this is also very much following Benjamin's notion of now time. Following Bergson and Deleuze, one could say that this intuitive form of knowing through practice is premised on the cut as much as on the process. Indeed, for Deleuze, intuition works through the act of cutting, of differentiating, the carving out and the intersection, and temporalizing thinking in terms of duration. That is to say, that the only way we can grasp process or historical time in movement is through the cut, through montage, through the interruption, the suspension of time, and what our own entanglement with that suspension opens up to. A movement out of our own temporality that enables us to connect with a wider one. As such, the purpose of my project is not simply to explore the subject matter of contemporaneity through artistic production, but rather to explore how artistic production can represent the conditions of contemporaneity, to quote Jakob. In any case, the final form of my dissertation, however, does not oppose an end or the end to anything. Instead, I would rather try to articulate how one can see endings otherwise, as plural, multiple, and always unfinished, the end as provisional, as interruption, as suspension, and as a cut that lingers in the ... So that was all for the kind of written, spoken presentation, and I can end with 5 more minutes from the last edit that I did. So as you know, Documenta is 100 days, and I did these programs spread out over those 100 days. So the first one you saw was on the opening day, and this one is on the closing day of the exhibition.
Is it the first exhibition of the 21st century? My understanding, Documenta represents at least as big a break with the past as realism and avant-garde modernism did in their centuries. Now, it doesn't mean, in saying this is the first exhibition of the 21st century, that Lumbung will come to dominate exhibitions in the future or art from now on, but that a challenge has been laid down to all of us working in the arts, all of us who have some responsibility for what might happen after this event. And it's a challenge which I feel we need to respond to. Not to silence, not to erase, but to respond to.
By the way, all of these programs can be accessed online. It's amazing. Amazing component of Documenta, which is very not spoken about and probably also a little bit secretive, is the whole online part where a lot of hours went into developing basically a whole platform separate or parallel to the official Documenta website. It's called lumpung.space, and you can find everything from minutes of meetings to brainstorm sessions to lectures, talks, texts, and also what we call harvest. So harvesting was an important tool or important kind of notion, or for this Documenta 15, harvesting some of the fruits of the knowledge that were produced and the kind of art that was produced during the 100 days of Documenta. So all of that is available online, and as well my 5 live broadcasts. I just called the project a live TV broadcast. That's it, I think.
Thanks a lot, Joen. We have time for questions and comments.
I know it's a lot that I threw at you from my own whatever background and I was a little bit unsure how much to include of that, but I think it is important. I mean, I'm really contextualization is really important in my practice, I think, and in everything I do, and I think it is important to have a kind of a prehistory to what you've seen. So that's why I decided to, although it felt a little bit self-indulgent to speak about my own background, it's still like.
I also, when you talk about sort of the relationship between your political work and your artistic work, and I'm a bit curious about your notion of revolt. You mentioned Yesi, and because I guess in his, I'm not an expert on Yesi, but also, for instance, someone like Didier Berman is in his project on what is it that makes us rise up, and his exhibition Uprising or Soulèvement also draws on Yesi, and then he decides to talk about uprising rather than revolt. But my question is, what constitutes a revolt in your terminology? Because it's recognizable when you talk about December in Athens and other sort of relatively easily identifiable political revolts. But now you're also talking about the non-spectacular, but also insisting on Documenta 15 as a form of revolt. So my question is, what I'm trying to get at is how come Documenta constitutes a revolt against what?
Yeah.
So there's, I guess, I don't know whether the Charles Eschi lecture was a bit about that also, but it seemed to me that the revolt of Documenta 15, what was that sort of addressed against? It seemed in some senses to be, I wouldn't say an art internal matter, but still sort of some kind of revolt maybe against the art institution as we knew it or something. I was just curious about why you need to designate Documenta 15.
I mean, it's a bit far-fetched. I agree. I would say, like, to call Documenta 15, I mean, a form of revolt. It's a bit far-fetched. I think, to me, it speaks to this kind of temporal, what Charles is also speaking to, like there's a certain cut, and what I also started out saying, that there's a certain cut in the way we in the kind of history that we speak to or against. And I think, as we know, or maybe as you know, Documenta was founded as this kind of Cold War project coming out of the Second World War and wanting to create a cultural bastion against the East. And of course there was all this scandals that came up that it was actually founded by people who were quite high up in the Nazi regime. So there is a very heavy history Documenta comes from a heavy history contextually and bureaucratically, and somehow always had to deal with that history in a way. And I think for me, what I argue that for me what a revolt is like a certain cut with historical time or the potentiality to make that cut in a way. I mean, revolt is somehow seen as the little sister to revolution in a way. So a revolution that's when we made it. That's when we are on the other side now, and life is beautiful. But I think for me, when I think about a revolution, it's actually not very political. I think for me, it's also a question of where to place the political act in a way. For me, the political act is in struggle, and it's in the revolt rather than in the revolution. So I think it's So it's somehow a contradictory place or space, conflictual and not determined in a way. And I think more than any other exhibition I've seen, Documenta felt like a very unfinished affair. Both during the 100 days, but also even still to this day, it still lingers in a way. And I think this, it's a concept that I kind of been trying to work with around lingering dates in a way. That's also why, for example, 6th of December in Athens is like a lingering date. It's something that keeps on coming back and haunting the Greek population, the Athenian left wing, and so on. So, or you can also say May 68 is also a lingering date in a way. And for me, Documenta has that. And yes, it is an internal art world affair in the end. I totally, but I think it's productive to speak about it as a form of revolt in a way. Because of that, at least the ambitions or I don't even know how much it was an outspoken ambition as much as it was like a kind of practical outcome that it really just broke with all. From like how economy was handled to how contracts were written. Everything on a very low practical level. This Documenta broke with so many ways of how Documenta has normally been done, and really challenged that system. So, within the art world, I would say it has a revolt potentiality, but of course, you cannot really compare it to what went on in Athens or what takes place in other places, in other revolts of the world. It's but it may be something that I have to be more clear on in a way. Maybe even make a definition, or my definition of revolt more clearly in my whatever writing part.
It was an open question.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. I think for that was very interesting, and congratulations on interesting work.
Thank you.
As I understand the work, or as I see it, I see it as a kind of, meta-reflection on different kinds of temporalities. I think that's very interesting to, we have many different forms of temporalities in it, repetition and the rhythm of music and the clock and the train station and the stillness of a room and the disruption, etc., etc. So I really, I'm very interested in the relationship between temporality and historicization. And so, in continuation of that remark, I wanted to ask you about how you think about art as orientation and what's wrong with linear time. Sorry, so that's because we keep thinking about, and also political time. I mean, political time, it needs to have something that's wrong, something that we make right, etc. So, I mean, and progress, etc. So, we understand that we're living in a time where we can no longer believe in the Hegelian timeline, etc., and everything is disrupted. But if you want to use art as orientation, and if you want to talk about politics to a certain degree, I guess there must be some kind of goal-orientedness that has a temporal.
Yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, I think as much as I search for like kind of solutions or answers or whatever, I don't see my art as kind of being able to provide that, and I don't think that's art's role neither. I think I want to problematize, and I want to complexify, and I want to analyze, but I don't think I'm interested in coming up with solutions or kind of proposals or so I think so I think I'm not so I don't see my work as positivistic in a sense, or like I think it actually has a much more negative kind of function in a way, to kind of to dismantle and to perhaps how do you say, to deconstruct, of course, and to, there's something about, for example, the documentary medium that I find extremely, I think we are very naive when it comes to the documentary form, what we call documentary. So I think a lot of my work is a struggle against the documentary form, as I also see it against the filmic, the cinema. I also see it against journalism in a way. So I'm much more anti than I'm actually pro very much. So it's more about somehow I don't know. There was a word that I cannot find, but. Anyway, yeah.
But you did say that you used art as a form of orientation.
Orientation, yeah.
So maybe you could say just what kind of orientation?
Yeah. I think I'm inspired by Frederick Jameson's cognitive, cognitive mapping.
Okay.
And he has this idea that art and culture, it's a concept that is not very elaborated in Jameson's writing, but I think, and I also like that sometimes, that it's like a kind of he points in a direction and he says, I don't know how this is going to be done, but here's some a way forward, or like a kind of at least like a horizon to work towards. But I think his idea is that art and culture can play a role in orienting ourselves, and I think part of that orientation also happens in the deconstruction in a way, in like as you say, like a meta reflection. I'm happy that you used that word, because I think, as you saw also, there's a lot of this kind of whatever, showing the apparatus is behind, and somehow like being kind of transparent about production itself, and I think that's really kind of goes through all of my work. It's kind of reflection on the means of production in a way, and not to hide how things are put together, but actually put it in the front and say these are the elements in a way. And I think that's, for me, that's one way of orientate, of giving some clues as to what are we looking at, and how are these things, how it's put together in a way, rather than mystifying or like holding back information, or like and of course going to those events, going to those revolts has also been a way to, I wrote a book in 2013 from Athens that was, I have it here, it was kind of a challenge for me, like not to it's called sammenbrudstykker, en dagbog fra Athen, and it's literally like it's a very hasty writing that I did every day over a period of 1 month. And I come from a visual background, so normally I would have my camera around me, but I was kind of challenged myself to write every day, like a kind of diary form. And I published that as a blog for like friends and comrades here in Denmark that could read it and follow a kind of more personal account of I mean, because again, like I was fed up with the kind of media narrative of the lazy Greeks and so on, and it was their own fault and whatever, like. So it was really important for me to come up with you can call it counter information or alternative, yeah. So that's another strategy of orientation is kind of I think the subjective account. I think that's also kind of important, that I don't try to speak on behalf of other people. I really speak from my own experiences and my own encounters and my own frustration, anger, and this book is kind of full of that. It's kind of written, I mean, almost with no grammar in a way, because I was so busy being involved out in the streets and then came back and writing, and so it has this kind of almost like the form itself is kind of a document in itself at that time. I mean, again, I guess it's also a hope, this orientation. I mean, again, I think I wouldn't. I mean, I think I do art to orientate myself. I mean, that's also what I said. Like, I think that's my main motivation of doing art, because it's a way to try and give form to very complex matters in a way, and that in itself is a way of orientation. Mm-hmm. And if the viewer can through my kind of through my engagements also can use that as a form of orientation, then I think that's great. But I don't wanna force it too much, perhaps. Or, yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation and fascinating work. I was wondering whether your work is also a critique of the temporal culture in contemporary society, both sort of the uniformization of time, and also sort of the acceleration of time, like Hartmut Rosa and others have described.
Yes. And yes, but I also believe I'm contributing to that. So it's a little bit both ways. I mean, it's. I think some friends in a group called the Invisible Committee, they wrote that the world is full of information, and there's so much. We know everything, all the hardship that goes on. Like we see how climate crisis being registered and shared, but it's not really information that we need. It's action in a way, and you cannot really take action when you're in front of screens. So that they have this kind of and basically what I do a lot of time is, I mean, at least my artwork is produced in front of screens. So I have this kind of struggle with myself and the form that I work in. But I think it is. It's definitely a critique of presentism, as I think this kind of as the only horizon. The now is the only horizon. I think it's definitely a critique against this kind of linear, progressive idea or modernist idea of time, and it's definitely like I hope that the work itself can complexify our understanding of time and but it is, it's a critique of how we perceive time in the capitalist regime, capitalist time. But I'm not sure what exactly the time that I'm proposing, where to place that. I think yeah, and maybe that's something for other people to say.
Perhaps. Maybe we should, those who have time for it, should have a glass of wine and talk more sort of casually
Yes.
on the fourth floor in the main building. Hope you will join us. So thanks again, Joen.
Thank you.
There's a lot to discuss.
Yes, I know. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.